Recording. There we are. We're live with Michael Shermer. truly, it's an
Wow,
honor
what a big audience.
Yeah, you
I
like
had no
that?
idea. Yeah.
There's a
That's really
studio
funny.
audience just out here in the
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
studio.
yeah. That's funny.
So, Michael Shermer is an American science writer, historian of science, executive director of the Skeptic Society, and founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, a publication focused on investigating pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. The author of over a dozen books, Shermer is known for engaging in debates on pseudoscience and religion, in which he emphasizes scientific skepticism. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, nice to see you.
Yeah, it's really an honor. I mean that sincerely. I watched about hours and hours and hours of your debates and various times that I found you on YouTube and other places when I first started deconstructing from my evangelical religious beliefs that I spent 48 years as an evangelical, 30 years as a pastor. So,
Right. Wow. That's a
yeah.
lot. That's a commitment. So you're not a pastor anymore.
Nope. I just do weddings and YouTube. So when I left Christianity, as a pastor, I was doing weddings, and I thought, wow, maybe I could make this into a full-time job if I
Right.
just pour my energy into it and market it more. And now we do between 200 and 300 weddings a year. I have a whole team now of 10 people, and
Wow. So it's a business.
yeah, it's my full-time business now.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Well, I asked you to send me a ceremony example. So I sent that to the couple that I'm the officiant for in October, and they're writing their own, but there were some useful tips in there. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And but it's been a while since I did that. I think I was officially registered as a minister, or whatever. Yeah, minister of the Universal Life Church, and I
Yep.
believe that allows me to legally marry somebody, but they still need a state license, right?
Yeah, the couple will need a license, yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the universal church ordination is plenty.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Well, so let's get into it. There's just so many questions that I have for you. One is, what I'm curious, what got you out of Christianity? I think you said you spent about 7 years as a evangelical
Correct.
Christian. What made you go, I don't know if this is true?
Yeah, there was a number of factors. I wasn't raised religious. My parents were just nothing. They weren't atheists or theists or anything really. I became a born again in high school under the influence of some friends who were into that. That was 1971. So this is kind of the early evangelical movement,
Yeah.
in which it was non-denominational, but just it's just me and Jesus.
Right.
And you go to the Bible reading classes, and where they play guitars and people are
Kind of the
wearing
Jesus people movement.
the Jesus people with the long hair and the beards and the guitars and the sandals, and yeah, it was big fun. But then I took it fairly seriously, and I went to Pepperdine University, and I took classes in the Old Testament and the New Testament and the life of Jesus, and I took a course in the writings of C.S. Lewis, which was pretty interesting. We read everything he ever wrote, and so that was instructive for me later, because so many current theists, or at least popular theists who do debates, that they lean a lot on C.S. Lewis. So I know those arguments. What
Yeah.
got me out of it really was just a number of things. When I was at Pepperdine, it was kind of a closed loop, in which all the arguments made sense. Everybody there believes. And although we entertained criticisms of Christianity, there were always, answers that were just, well, that's the rebuttal. There it is, done. And then when I went to graduate school, it was just a secular university, and it wasn't an issue at all. I mean, no one, people were not religious, or maybe they were. It was private to them. That didn't make any difference. We were just doing science. I was doing experimental psychology, and but for fun, I took courses in evolutionary biology. So I realized, oh, all that creationism stuff was nonsense.
Right.
And Then I took courses in social psychology and anthropology, and I realized, a lot of these beliefs are just socially constructed. Just depends entirely where you happen to have been born,
Yeah.
when you were born and raised, and what your influences were. If you look at those maps, world maps of religion,
Yes.
Where do people believe in different parts of the world? There's no comparable map for physics or biology or whatever. It's just those are universal truths, whereas religions, it became apparent to me, were not universal truths. They
Right.
were something else. They were religious truths or just mythical truths or whatever. And I went through my Joseph Campbell stage of, the hero with a thousand faces
Yeah.
and the myths we live by and all that. And I loved all that stuff. But it really made me realize, this is not something that I want to believe in the same way I accept the theory of evolution or the Big Bang theory or whatever. And then I don't know. I just got interested and focused on other things, and then the problem of evil was always a troubling one for me. I never thought that the responses to that were all that good
Yeah.
from Christians. I mean, and I read Rabbi Kushner's book. When good things happen to bad things happen to good people. Basically, he's like, well, just because they do, and God can't do anything about it. It's like, oh, okay. And it was a rather different answer than the Christian answers. He was Jewish, and then something bad happened to my girlfriend, my sweetheart from Pepperdine, Maureen. She was in a car accident and broke her back, and I was still religious barely at the time that this happened. This was 1979, I think it was, and and she was also Christian, and just sweet, loving, wonderful woman, and paralyzed for life. She's
Mm.
still alive, still paralyzed, and it's like, why would something like that happen? Why would a good God who could do something about it? Because Christians absolutely believe that God intervenes
Yep.
and makes things happen. Like he got me that job, or he prevented me from getting in this accident, or
The parking
he,
spot at the
I got
mall.
that parking spot. Yeah. Got the job, everything that happens by chance gets attributed to God. Then what about the bad things? And it was too convenient to say, well, that God works in mysterious ways. Well, what kind of answer is that? Or worse, that bad things happen to help you develop moral character. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yep. I used to say
You
that.
you did?
Yeah. When I was an evangelical, I'd say, well, the secret things belongeth to the Lord, or God works in mysterious ways, or
Yeah,
God
yeah.
wants to teach you a lesson, or you didn't have enough faith, or I
Right,
came from that
right.
charismatic circle, and yeah, for 30 years, you do those mental gymnastics to make things that just don't make sense. And it wasn't until, for me personally, much like what you're talking about, I just started looking and reading outside of my little Christian bubble, and I thought, there's no way this is true. Clearly, this is a man-made thing.
Yes.
And I just couldn't believe it anymore. And once the scales start falling off your eyes, then it's just so clear. It's just
Yeah.
so absolutely clear. So when people say, "Could you ever go back?" I'm like, like that. That's just, there's no way I could go back. I mean, God would have to appear in the flesh for everybody to see and be like, do a miracle right in front of me to persuade me. But just based upon, Matthew chapter 9, verse 34, that's not going to do it for me.
Yeah. But even there, you see, I mean, I think about this. What would it take for me to go back to believing in God? I mean, what you just described, I've seen Penn and Teller do magic tricks
Mm.
that I have no idea how they did it. And they really looked miraculous, including walking on water, turning water into wine, and so on. Yeah, the magicians can do all that. And Christians know this. They go, oh, yeah, yeah, I know. But Jesus did it for sure, for real.
He really did it.
Well, what about Satya Sai Baba, the Indian guru
Yeah.
fakir, who raised people from the dead, and all these different things, walk on water and levitate and whatnot, walk through doors, and of course Christians go, well, that those aren't real. Well, how do you know the difference? I mean, because his believers think, millions of people believe that he does these things. They say they saw them themselves. Yeah, well, then the Christians become good skeptics. They're like, oh, well, it's eyewitness account. You can't trust that. And people exaggerate and they misperceive. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So why does this not apply to your guy? And so that kind of did it for me. Really, I just stopped believing. I didn't make a big deal about it. I just quit talking about it, which I think
Yeah.
was a relief. I think that was a relief to my family and friends because I was constantly,
You were
evangelizing.
evangelizing.
'Cause you're
Trying to
supposed
put
to
out
do
your
that,
getting saved. Yeah.
let me tell you about Jesus, or let's pray, or whatever.
Oh, I used to be on the street corner. I would do the street corner preaching stuff. I was a full on evangelical Pentecostal tongue talker.
Oh,
So
you were Pentecostal. Oh, wow.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's really serious. I've been to some Pentecostal meetings, and that is wild.
it is
I
wild.
mean, these people are writhing on the floor, and
Oh yeah, I've been there.
whoa.
I've seen. There's a particular preacher. His name's Rodney Howard Brown. He's called the Laughing Preacher, and he's pretty globally popular in that circle. And I've seen 5,000 people laughing hysterically, dancing erratically, and falling over. It's wild.
What is your
I've been there.
explanation for this? Like a social contagion kind of thing?
Yeah, it's just a social contagion. It's much like, like a U2 concert or any concert where it
Right. Get
it it
everybody
gets
going.
euphoric. Yeah, it just gets you going, the music and the rhythmic movements and you believe it. That's the weird thing for me, Michael, is I believed it for 48 years and
That's a
unfortunately,
lot.
or fortunately or unfortunately, it took me kind of going through a midlife crisis and really looking deeply into history and reading the book Sapiens by
Oh, wow.
Yuval Noah
Right.
Harari. When I
That's
read
what
that
Oh,
book,
wow.
that
Okay.
really, because Neanderthals were not anything that I was ever taught about in Bible college.
Right.
And
Yes.
so
Well,
that threw a wrench into my creationist Adam and Eve were the first two humans and all of the stuff that I believed, because I was a literalist. I believed that it was literally true. And
wow.
so,
Wow.
when people said there's errors in the Bible, I would always say, well, there are apparent errors, and I could make the gymnastic backflips and reconcile those things that are just clearly not reconcilable. And yeah, it was just the world that I lived in.
So,
And
was your journey out of religion then mostly intellectual, or were there also some personal or emotional components?
yeah, for me, it was intellectual. I mean, I'm just like anybody. I've had, tragic things happen in my life. But for me, it was just an intellectual journey where I just started, you know what it was? I had a neighbor friend ask me, what if you're wrong? And
Yeah.
I thought, that's interesting because, I thought the Mormons were wrong. I thought Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong. I thought
Right.
Hinduism was wrong. I thought Buddhism was wrong. I thought, every other religion was wrong. How is it that I just so happened to stumble on the right one? And I remember really taking that
Yeah.
question to heart and asking myself, how do I know that this is the ultimate truth of all truths, and this one is the right one? Like, what if the Muslims are right and I'm wrong? And then it just started crumbling after that. And then I had to get honest about, wait, you know what? Prayers don't work. I've been praying all my life. Sometimes it goes my way, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, it just, I started
Right.
realizing it. I forget who it was. I think it's the comedian Ricky Gervais said that I get just the same results from praying to Jim Belushi or whatever,
Yeah.
and I
Ricky
resonated
Gervais
with
is
that.
so good.
And I
Yeah.
thought, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. There's definitely no, when you really look at something skeptically, like you talk about, it just doesn't hold up. I mean, it's just, oh my goodness, this is so clear. This is clearly not true.
Yeah, my first clue on this was when I became a born again. Again, I was in high school, 11th grade. My friend George and went to the Presbyterian Church in Glendale, and he was talking to me about this. And then my friend Frank, he was telling me about becoming religious. Anyway, so one Sunday I went to church with George and his family, in part because he had a really cute sister, Joyce. And I thought, oh, well, this would be a good opportunity to spend a little time. So we did. And then at the end, the preacher did the calling up to the front, like come on up and be accepted. And I thought, well, all right, what the hell? I'll do it. So I went
Yeah.
up. He was really quite the dynamic speaker. I was really moved. He was something else. And, a Tony Robbins kind of guy. He was big,
Oh
the
yeah.
big voice, the whole thing. Come on up. I'm like, whoa, okay, here I go. And my friend George is like, whoa, you're doing it. Yeah, I'm like, I'm doing it. So, and then the next day at school, I went back and I saw Frank. I said, Frank, I did it. I became a born again Christian. I accepted Jesus as my savior. And he goes, all right, well, where did you do this? I said, the Presbyterian church. He goes, no, that's the wrong one. I went, what? What do you mean the wrong one? Turns out Frank was a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh,
Yeah. And I went, huh. How could there be a right one and a wrong one in the same religion?
yeah,
Right? I mean, this is kind of my first inkling of this. Then, of course, when you study comparative world religions and mythology, it's like, oh well, of course, there's thousands of these things,
yeah,
and they all vary either a little bit or a lot, and they can't all be true, or in fact, none of them are true in that sense.
sure.
My analogy is if imagine you were a anthropologist from Mars and you came down and talked to a bunch of people, each of whom said, well, we have the one true religion. How would
Right.
you know? If you're just like an objective, neutral observer, show me your evidence, then I'll get back to you, something like that. And of course, they can't do that.
Yeah. Well, especially when you talk about absolute truth, like you said earlier, when something's absolutely true, it's true around the world.
But
It's not
universal
just
truth,
true here,
yeah,
you know.
universalism. It should be, it should be true here, and like in physics, it should be true in the Andromeda galaxy, and the way
Right.
stars are formed or gravity works or whatever. We just assume that these laws apply everywhere. And it's just not like that for religious or, for that matter, political systems.
Yeah.
They just don't operate in that way.
Yeah. So do you feel that the church is declining and, the rise of the nuns? And then with that, do you think that there will be a time when Christianity or religion overall will go extinct?
Um, I don't think it'll go extinct. The data is pretty clear now after many years of polling that the decline of religiosity is a real thing in the Western world, but particularly in the United States, which is where it's shocking that it happened.
Yeah.
They've been predicting it for ages, but it finally, in the last 15 years or so, has started. I mean, it used to be the people that ticked the box for no religious affiliation was in the low single digits, and then it kind of crept its way up to around 10% or so, maybe by 2005 to 2010. Then it shot up to like 15, 20%, 25% by like 5 years ago. Now it depends on how you break this down by generations. It's maybe 20 to 25% for baby boomers like me, so like 25 to 30% for the millennials, and then for Gen Z it's like 40, probably 40%, could be
Yeah.
50%, we don't know yet. So that's shocking. Now they're not atheists, they're not members of the skeptics that are buying
Sure.
my books or whatever. They're they just don't tick the box for a religious affiliation. They may be spiritual but not religious, as the Navy
Yes, yes.
as
I
the
I
Navy
went
says.
through that phase. I went through that phase where I said I'm spiritual, not religious, which was almost like a trendy way of saying, "Hey, I still believe in
Yeah,
God,"
something cool.
I wanna
Yeah,
be cool.
I'm not one
Uh,
of those atheist guys.
yeah, I'll tell you, Michael, it took me I didn't really acknowledge being an atheist. Oh, goodness. It's probably been within the last couple years. I would say I was agnostic. And I would say I was still saying I was spiritual, but I was agnostic, meaning, I don't know. And even today, I would say, if you ask me if I believe in God, I would say, no, I don't. That's why I'm atheist. I don't believe in a God or gods.
Mm.
But I'm agnostic because, yeah, I've never traveled the universe. I don't know what's out there. I mean, there might be something out there, and like whoever it was that said this, I like surprises. I mean, maybe there's something out there I don't know, but I definitely don't believe in God, and I definitely don't believe in the Bible God.
Mhm.
That one's just for me an absolute. I'm certain that one doesn't exist.
Mhm.
Um, just in my mind, just from reading the Bible cover to cover for 48 years, uh, it's very clear. But I don't know what's out there.
Yeah, well, so here you can transition to more esoterica type religious beliefs where maybe you are like Einstein, who says he believes in Spinoza's God. Well, what does that mean? Well, the laws of nature, pantheism, the entire universe is God, or the laws of nature are God, and then, okay, so what are we really talking about then? Because most people by God, they mean a personal God,
Yes.
an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent entity that created the universe, created us, knows we're here, cares about us, is going to determine whether we go to the good place or the bad place, and so on. That's what most people mean by it. I
Yeah.
don't really mind if somebody, some of these kind of, I don't know, super intellectual, intelligent design creationists making these arguments for something like a deism, or maybe God started the whole system off by creating the laws of nature, then stepped out of the system and it just runs itself.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, okay, maybe, but you're only saying that because we don't really have a good answer for what kicked off the Big Bang,
Right.
or what was there before there was the beginning of time, which is a weird question in itself.
Right.
What was there
Yes.
before there was anything? Or it's like the problem of why is there something rather than nothing? Well, what do you mean by nothing? Because when physicists talk about nothing, they mean something rather different, that there's, maybe some imaginary particles, or there's, a quantum soup of, particles out of which just pure energy,
Yeah.
or space time. And then out of that comes the particles that create the Big Bang and so on. But the theist would go, no, 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 I'm saying, but more than that, go back even further. There's not even space time. There's not even quantum foam. There's nothing. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but then there can't be God either. Well, no,
Right.
no, God
It's
is
just complete
outside of
emptiness.
space and time. Well, but you just said that, nothing, nothing could come, something cannot come from nothing, but apparently it can. If God created it, then apparently you can create something out of nothing.
Well, then God came from nothing. I love that argument where I've
Right.
heard you do that.
Right.
Well, if there has to be a creator, or if there has to be a creator for this creation, well, then who created the creator? And then it just goes into an endless.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, they will then say, well, you have to stop the causal, arrow somewhere, causal chain somewhere. Well, why not just go one more step? What's wrong with that? Why can't I just say the universe created itself? The laws of nature just sprung from the Big Bang, which came from maybe some previous universe. In other words, at some point, if you go back in infinite regress, you just have to say, we don't know, nobody knows. You can't go
Yeah.
back any further. The information is lost. I mean, this is what cosmologists say. It's how close can they get to the Big Bang now? With the Kepler telescope and all that. Within like 300 million years of I think it is, was it that a couple 100 million years of the start of the Big Bang, which they think is pretty good. Maybe it
Yeah.
was several 100,000, whatever it was. It's not like 1 second after the Big Bang we can get back that far. The information is just gone.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it goes. We may never know. So, or just maybe theoretical, or
Right.
maybe we'll know in 500 years. Who knows? But the chances of it turning out that the Christian God, the Judeo-Christian God, turns out to be the right one, I'd say chances of that happening are pretty slim.
Yeah. Well, so when you think about religion in the future, do you think we will become so advanced and have more knowledge to the point of realizing that it's just a human construct and it maybe is useful in some ways, but it's not actually literally factually true?
I think so. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do is to I don't want to say just quit believing in God entirely, because this is not going to happen. It's not realistic. Why not treat religious truths for what they are, their own kind of truth, instead of treating it like a scientific question or an empirical truth? My next book is about this, called Truth: What It Is, How to Find It, Why It Still Matters. And there, my couple chapters on religion and God. Why not treat stories in the Bible like literary truths, like you would a Jane Austen novel or a Shakespeare play? No one would mistake the characters in those novels and plays as actually existing.
Right.
If you ask that, was there really a Harry Potter somewhere, in a Hogwarts place? People would look at you and go, "What are you talking about? Though it's
Yeah.
a made up story. It's a great story." Or the characters in a Jane Austen novel or a Dostoevsky novel. That you're missing the point by saying, "Did it really happen?"
Yeah.
Um, they have deeper truths that they write about. What makes great novelists great is that they touch on deep truths about human nature and relationships and power and jealousy and love and anger and revenge and justice. And, that's what makes great literature great. And so why not treat Bible stories like that and just say, I don't know if the resurrection really happened. Probably not, but it's what it stands for, forgiveness, starting over, being born again, that kind of, something like that, like a
Yeah.
mythical, again, a Joseph Campbell or more current example, a Jordan Peterson kind of interpretation of these stories. That's what it represents something, and you can get value out of the story for your own life. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm all right with that.
Sure. Yeah, me too. Matter of fact, what led me out of Christianity was really the pursuit of truth. The truth, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that
Mm,
legitimately is what I was pursuing. And it did set me free.
mm.
It set me free from believing in, fic made up things and believing in, pseudoscience and I was pretty deep in it. I was, which is wild to be where I'm at now because I still have all those, one of my friends said, it's like you got a superpower. You can go back into your conspiratorial religious mind. You can go back into your anti-vaxxer mind. You can go back into your, pseudo medicine mind and all that stuff. And I can go back and I can remember thinking certain things and feeling a certain
Mm,
way
mm.
and now feeling completely different, but based upon factual science and things that are real. Which brings me, another question I had because your new book is conspiracy.
Mm.
Um, what I have family members who are, the chemtrails, 5G, Tom
Right.
Hanks, lizard people. I mean, all that stuff that is just unbelievable. I have family members. I had a family member, Michael, just 2 days ago that said, the government can control the weather. And I was like, yeah, no, they can't. Not like what you're thinking. Like this is not real.
Yeah.
But Michael, I make light of it, but it's disconcerting. It's upsetting, that I have family members that 100% are full on it, believe adrenochrome, sucking the blood.
Adrenochrome,
I mean,
right.
all that stuff, like
Right.
literally believing that stuff is actually true.
Yeah.
And I just can't wrap my mind around how in the world that they could fall for that.
There is a religious impulse to it in this sense that it's an overarching explanation for the randomness of and chaos of life. I mean, most stuff that happens, it's just shit happens. There's
Yeah.
there's no reason behind it at all. Again, the problem of theodicy or the problem of evil. Why does God allow bad things to happen? Well, just bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. I mean, it's just there's no rhyme or reason about it, and that doesn't feel good to most people.
Yeah.
And that is in part an explanation for conspiracism is that that it's not the randomness of the stock market or but geopolitics or whatever. It's these 12 guys in London, the Illuminati, they're running the world. Oh, or Alex Jones, the globalists are doing it. Who are the globalists?
Soros.
Oh, they're everywhere. can you
Soros.
can you name them? Yeah, George Soros. Like any one person can pick up the phone and start running a world economy or whatever. I mean, there are a few bad people. I mean, Putin can start a war, yeah, but for the
Sure.
most part, there's not much most people can do about things. So, I think it's scarier to think nobody's in charge,
Yeah.
and that for the most part, we don't know why things happen, and so I think that it's more tempting to think, that there's this underlying secret behind it, and once I get to it, oh, it's the Illuminati or it's the Rockefellers or the globalists or the Bilderbergers or whatever they're doing it, then it actually kind of feels good, like, ooh, I'm in on some secret knowledge.
Yeah.
Then there's also it's called the proportionality bias. The larger the effect you're interested in explaining, the larger the cause you would like it to be. So the analogy I use, the Holocaust, one of the worst genocides in human history, and the cause of this is the Nazi regime, one of the worst political regimes in human history. There's kind of a balance there. They they make sense. But if you think, that the JFK was assassinated by who? Lee Harvey Oswald, this complete nobody, a loser, just this just really, come on.
Yeah, it's got to be something more than that.
Got to be more than that. Princess Diana, cause of her death, drunk driving, speeding, and she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Oh, come on. Princesses are not supposed to die like that. That's what regular people like me, or this one I hear all the time. You're telling me 19 guys with box cutters brought down the World Trade Center buildings? Come on. There has to be some massive, huge. It's like, no, actually, in a free society, that's exactly how somebody could pull it off, because we don't want a police state where we know what every single person's doing, like in China with all their cameras. We want people to be free to just move about, and you don't know what most people are doing most of the time. And that's how hijackers can get away with something like that. Plus,
Yeah.
of course, no one had thought of, we'd long been familiar with hijacking, but not hijacking and not landing and
Right.
making a
Right.
demand for ransom. That's what we were used to. That was what was new. So again, it's just, there's this, big plot. The Bush administration was behind it, and, to get oil and guns and war and Halliburton, and, they start connecting the dots, and it's like, oh, now I understand why this happened, as opposed to, it's just this Middle East policy, Osama bin Laden, and he funded it, and these 19 guys did this. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That just doesn't feel like it's balanced.
Well, I remember even when Obama was coming into office, and I was a Christian at the time, and I remember just hearing so many things in our circles about, he's the Antichrist, and he's gonna, destroy America, and this
Mm.
and that, and he's not even really American.
Yeah, the Antichrist. When I was a Christian in the 70s, we read The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. I'm sure you know
Oh, Hal Lindsey, yeah,
that. And yeah, it was fun speculating who the Antichrist was. It was the Ayatollah Khomeini, or it was one of the Russian leaders, or it was Henry Kissinger or Richard
yeah,
Nixon, or, it was great fun speculating. And when you believe it, every time you read the newspaper every day, it's like, oh, look what's happening in the Middle East. It says right there in Revelation, book 12, number passage 13. That explains it.
yeah. If you add those three numbers up together, it equals this. That's the date. I
Did
I
you do that?
remember. You know what? Jesus said no one knows the day or the hour. So I never got into the predictions, though I felt like it was intimate, it was going to happen at any time. The rapture, like a thief in the night, it could just take you at any time. Terrifying movie, by the way. But
Yes.
I've had people in my family, I won't mention their names, but we have people in the family that literally, because my family's still all evangelical Christian, and they all think I'm going to hell, especially now that I have a YouTube channel talking about this, which is all new to me. Like, this is all new. I've been doing this for less than a year.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
by
Oh, wow.
accident. It wasn't even on purpose. It was by accident that I did a YouTube where I just told a little bit about my story and talked about being a former evangelical pastor, aka cult leader, and then rest is history. I woke up the next day and I'm like, what? 10,000 views? I've never had 10,000 views in anything I've ever said before, but I never talked about this. I always talked about relationship stuff or wedding stuff or whatever.
I see. I
This
see.
was much like what you said. I was just not a Christian anymore, and I wasn't telling anybody about it. It was just my private personal journey. And then, I got called by a couple other podcasters and got on their thing, and
Oh, nice.
it's history
So
now.
have you encountered Dan Dennett's, the late Dan Dennett's, preacher? What was it? The Pastor Project, I think he called it. Of these are people like you. They were once preachers, but they were still preachers, but didn't really want to be. They didn't believe anymore. And it turns out there's quite a few, and it kind of came forward. It was a little bit of like a haven for them to talk
Yeah.
about.
The Clergy Project.
The Clergy Project. Sorry, yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
you've obviously encountered that. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I guess just tell me a little bit about what it's like, because there, if your livelihood depends on it, and you're supporting your family, and you got kids, and all your friends and family, and they all believe like you. How do you give that up? I mean, that's just really got to be huge.
It was very difficult because, yes, I had a church of 300 people. I had planted it, like started it in my living room, grew it to 300 people. Um, yeah, it was my full-time income. It was my career. It was my livelihood. I mean, my goal, my dream was to be the next tattooed version of Joel Osteen. I was just like gonna go all the way.
Yeah,
And I grew up, around the Jimmy Swag. I met Jimmy Swaggart. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I
you
met
did. You met
like
them. Oh my
yeah,
God.
way back when. So I was in those circles. I like even the Robert Morris, the big scandal right now with Pastor Robert Morris out of Texas.
Mm.
I met him. I mean, you name the famous person.
How about Rick Warren? Did you know Rick Warren?
Uh, I
Saddleback
went to his
College.
church. Yeah, I've been to his church. I've never hung out with him privately, but I've met him at conferences. Shook his hand and stuff. But the church that I worked at before I planted my church back in the year 2000, I worked at a church down in Houston, Texas, and the pastor of the church I worked at worked right beside Joel Osteen at Lakewood Church.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I was just connected in that whole world, and yeah, that was going to be my retirement. My dream was to have a huge big church building that would have my name on the side of it, and then when I died, it would be something that I would leave for the world to just whatever, and it just all came crashing down when I started really questioning my faith and questioning things, especially because I had a lot of gay friends in my
Mm.
world. And I remember just struggling with that because as an evangelical, we believed it was an abomination, right?
Mm.
And I kind of had moved a little bit and said, okay, it's okay to be gay, just can't do gay things. And,
Oh my God.
so
Yeah.
like, be celibate, right? And then I thought, as I turned that back around on me, I thought, as a heterosexual, could I be celibate? And I'm like, no, this just doesn't work. It just didn't seem fair. And I thought, it's like being born without an arm. And then the Bible says it's a sin to not have an arm.
Mm.
All of a sudden I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Maybe this is an interpretation issue. And so, I just started digging into it. And then that got me outside of the evangelical circles, to which I got criticized and actually removed. My ordination got pulled from me
Mm.
from the evangelicals because I started saying, hey, I don't think it's wrong to drink as long as you don't get drunk.
Mm.
I don't think it's wrong to be gay. I don't think it's wrong to be gay and do gay and all this. Like, I don't think any of that stuff's a sin anymore. I support same-sex marriage. So I'm starting to move from conservative Christian to be a little bit more liberal
Mm.
and open-minded and accepting. And the problem with that is when you have a church that's evangelical fundamental and you start trying to shift them to be more open-minded, it just doesn't go well.
And this
And
was all within the last few years?
this was 7 years ago. So
7 years ago, I see.
it started for me. I closed the church down. Technically 2020 is when it really officially just gave up the ghost, because what I did at first, because I was like, hey, I'm spiritual, not religious. So then
Yeah.
I started teaching like Buddhist principles, and we started doing meditations and breath work. I kind of got into that
Mm.
spiritual world. And after hanging out there for a minute, I just also looked at that and was like, none of this is true. Like, this is literally
Right.
not true. And I just could not give myself to something that wasn't true. There was just something inside of me that just was like, you got to find what's actually factually true and
Mm.
go with that.
Yeah.
And so finally, 2020, I just completely
So,
walked
but
away.
this is post the Supreme Court decision making same-sex marriage the law of the land. Because my prediction at the time was that Christians will now just quit talking about that. It's going to be a non-event, a
Yeah,
non-starter within a decade or so, and I think that's largely come true. I mean, it's not really
absolutely.
a same-sex marriage and gay issues. It's not really a thing anymore. I mean, the whole trans movement, but that's different
That's
than
the new
the
thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's a new thing, but that's different than the same-sex marriage. Yeah. So, were you married at the time? And
Yes, yes, I
okay,
had been married for 25 years and
oh my
went through a
god,
divorce in 2019 at the same
wow.
time that I'm deconstructing.
And was that
And
part of it? Your wife just said, "Hey, no, we can't be married if you're not a believer."
Well, not exactly that. There's a story there, but part of it was, yeah, just two completely different views on the world,
Yeah.
was part of it. And there's another story there that, for me, but, um, yeah, just it, in you couldn't reconcile the differences,
Yeah.
you
And
couldn't
then,
reconcile the differences.
and the rest of your family, I don't know if your parents are still around or if you have siblings or how they took all that.
Yeah. Yeah, so my sister had passed away from a drug overdose years and years ago, like 15
Mm,
years ago now, my younger sister. My mom and dad are still evangelical Christian. They don't go to church though. I love them very much, but they're pretty conspiratorial and are in that camp that is also conspiratorial pretty heavily. But yeah, all of my family still hardcore Christian, and I ended up being single for about 3 years and then met someone just precious. And then we got married. It'll be 2 years ago here in just a couple
oh,
weeks.
nice. Well,
Yeah,
congratulations.
yeah,
Yeah.
and very
But you're,
equally yoked, very same ideas, same thoughts, though she's spiritual, she would say she's spiritual, not religious, but I think it works because she's not fundamental and I'm not fundamental.
mhm.
And most of what I say outside of believing that there's something out there, her and I are on the same page, uh, where, Christianity is clearly just a man-made construct.
Yeah.
Same with
Yeah.
every religion. Um, so yeah, but it was difficult because it was my career. Like you said, it was my livelihood.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
did find out
Yeah.
about the clergy project and I did talk to them a little bit, but I had the wedding business that I could turn into. And so truthfully, I drove Uber for a year and did
You
weddings.
did?
And
That's great.
because I was like, what am I going to go do? Get a job? I'm like, I can't go get a
Right.
job. I've always been a self-employed person like all my
Right.
life.
Right.
And so I just worked really hard. And like I said, I have 10 officiants now on my team. We have a huge team and we do a lot of weddings. So,
And do you do all kinds of weddings, religious, non-religious, whatever?
yep, whatever. We even have a Buddhist monk on our team who does Buddhist weddings.
That's wild.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but most people that are seeking me and my officiant team out clearly aren't religious. That if they were religious, they'd have their pastor or their priest do it. So we just are just out there for everybody else. And the majority, what I've noticed, a lot of people, even the people that would quasi say they're Christian, they're not what I would have called a Christian when I was a Christian. That
Hmm.
they're not going to church, they're not praying, they're not reading their Bible, they're not tithing, like all the things that in my mind
Right.
what made up if you're a Christian, like a real sold out for Jesus type person, you're doing all these things and these people are not doing these things. So I would have used that scripture and said they're lukewarm,
Yeah.
and Jesus is going to spit them out of his mouth. I would have been preaching that.
What do they call it? Cafeteria Christians or cafeteria Catholic? I just pick and choose the couple things I like and then
Yep.
just do
Yep.
everything else I want to do. Yeah. Well, again, if we break it down into different cohorts, yeah, the fundamentalists who, insist that everybody else believe what they believe and including trying to influence politics like Christian nationalism, that's what bothers me. If somebody's private about it and they don't care, they don't talk about it and it's, they like are similar to what you just described, then, I guess I don't really care that much because it doesn't affect me. Right.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and I've noticed that with you and a lot of the stuff that I've watched, you seem very kind-hearted, I mean, I assume what I'm seeing online is you in real life, you just
the
seem like
real
a
me.
nice person, like in life, like you seem like a good dude. And I've watched all of the different people, loved Christopher Hitchens, God
Mm.
rest his soul.
Yeah.
I
Or
really
somebody.
love him, but man, he would go after people, he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really hardcore. I'm a little bit, I don't know what the word is. I'm just a little bit more sympathetic, but yet I do make fun and I do mock that belief system. I try not to mock the person because for me, I feel uniquely qualified because I was that person.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm talking about my life, and I do believe that my views were delusional. They were moronic, and I really believe that. I don't
Right.
believe that I was a moron. I just believe that I had moronic beliefs.
Yeah.
But Christians, I get a lot of comments on my videos, people attacking me. I was never a real Christian. I'm just following Satan now. And, I'm sure
Right.
you've gotten that stuff too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You're working for the devil, Michael.
Well, I just had a correspondence with a young man the last few days who saw one of my videos. So what happened to you? I mean, did you? Why did you turn away from God? Why do you hate God now? It's like it has nothing to do with it. I don't hate God. I
Yeah.
don't even think there is a God.
Right.
Well, why not? It's like because there's not enough evidence, and he could tell he was just not comfortable with that answer
Yeah.
because then it could happen to him. I said, all right, so how confident are you on a scale, a Bayesian scale of say 1% to 99% that that the Judeo-Christian God Yahweh is the one true God and Jesus really died for your sins? He's 100%. It's like, okay, it can't be 100%
Yeah. No one.
because you define God as omniscient, omnipotent, right? Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. So only God knows anything with 100% because that would make you omniscient. And I presume you're not God. Well, that's right. I'm not God. Then you can't be 100% certain. No, I am 100%. He wasn't really following the
Yeah.
chain of logic there.
The logic. Yeah.
And but of course what he means by 100% is like I'm super duper duper confident that I got the right religion. And all I wanted to do was just say, how about just make it 99%? Just give it a 1%. And
Yeah.
maybe try reading like Bart Ehrman, who I like to recommend to
I
people.
love Bart Ehrman. He really has been helpful for me.
Yes. Oh my God. Because he believed like you did, but even probably more so because he went to well, maybe about the same, right? He went to not Biola. He went to the other Christian college in Ohio, was it, or Michigan?
Uh,
Michigan.
uh,
What's the one?
Wheaton, starts at
Yeah, yeah,
TON.
that's right.
Wheaton,
Yeah,
Wheaton,
Wheaton,
Wheaton.
Wheaton College. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then so he's got the whole fundamentalist thing and take the Bible literally, and then he went to Princeton Theological. He's like, oh my God,
It's
this
like,
is
oh no.
completely different than what I thought. And and where's the better scholarship? It's with the Princeton Theological. Anyway, so but what's really helpful there is the context of what people believed in the first century.
Yeah.
And the idea of like in the Roman world, God's coming down and interacting with humans was very common. Everybody, of course, we know this happens. They have sex
Yeah.
with people, they get angry, the gods are jealous, all this stuff. And it's like, oh, that explains a lot.
Yeah.
And that the virgin birth and the resurrection, these are not unique stories. To the Christian, it's like, well, we have the one super duper unique religion because no one else has the resurrection like we do. Well, 2,000 years ago, yeah, actually, lots of people did.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that helps. I like
The
Bart for that
the
reason.
Epic of Gilgamesh, had the flood story and before the Bible,
Right,
the Noah.
right.
That was something I didn't know. Um, There was just so many little things like that. It seems like the more educated you become, even when you're a Christian, if you are getting an education and you're really looking at it, it's like I don't know any super educated Christian who is a fundamental literalist.
Hmm,
Like they all know. They're like, well, no, of course Genesis is not real. That's just allegorical.
right.
It's just a story, and yet they're still Christian.
Yeah.
Uh, Fundamentalism is a rather new new evolution of the way that Christians are. Even that I've listened to enough of Bart Ehrman to
Hmm.
realize that Christianity 1,000 years ago isn't like what we're seeing today.
No, no. Or even in our own lifetime. Well, you must be, how old are you? You must be in your 60s now or late
56.
56, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how long has it been politicized, where Jesus is a capitalist and a militarist and
Right.
he looks like Rambo, right?
Right.
And he's gonna
Yeah.
kick ass.
Yeah. He ain't turning no other cheek.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being that way in the 70s. Jesus
He
was
was all
this,
peace and love.
loving and kind of feminist and yeah.
Yeah. Probably even smoked some weed.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
What are some helpful? Got a couple questions for you. Actually, I've got a book of questions in front of me. One of the things that what is the most helpful or beneficial thing that you've ever brought up with a Christian that gets them to really contemplate? Is there any certain question or topic or argument that you've found to be a good one for on the side of the atheist? And then I'm curious on the reverse, is there an argument from the God side that you find pretty difficult to debunk?
Well, on the first part, the argument I just made with the young man I was telling you about, that actually does work for most thoughtful, more intellectual theists, who will then say, yeah, of course, I don't know for sure. I mean, you could be right. I'm just reasonably confident. Or they'll say, it works for me. It's just something that's personal for me, and it's like, okay, I understand
What
that.
else
Or
can you say to that? Yeah.
like with the Ian Hersey conversion last year to Christianity, I know the whole story, the backstory behind that. In part, her intellectual argument is that, Christianity is better for the West than Islam, or the even crazier wokeism, that even the atheists know what a woman is.
Right.
So, so we have to be careful about the far left and the Islamists and so on. That's more of a cultural argument. She has since then also admitted publicly that there were some personal reasons, that she's, lived under a death threat for decades, and this has taken quite a toll on her psyche. And she, had some personal issues with depression and alcoholism and so on. Found religion, found Jesus, and turned her life around. And her
Wow.
family is better. Kids, marriage, the career, writings, everything. She's working on a book now explaining all this.
And so she literally believes it's true?
Yes. Oh, yeah. At first, it was more of the cultural Christian stuff, but then, she's more and more publicly came out and said, I think Jesus was literally rose from the dead. She and Richard Dawkins did a public event on this, and Richard said exactly what you said. You can't possibly literally believe that, do you?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I do. It was like, oh, wow, okay. I think that's what happens if you maybe encounter more preachers like you used to be, where they take that passage from Paul, who says something like, if Jesus has not risen, then there's no point in being a Christian, right. Basically, but by that, I mean, literally happened, not metaphorically, not psychologically, not mythically, but literally. And so I think that's kind of the direction Ian went. But I never want to disparage somebody that says, look, it saved my life. I was practically suicidal. Okay, well, good. It's better than that.
Yeah.
Right. But if somebody makes the intellectual argument, then I'll use that line of reasoning, like, well, how confident are you? Because could you be wrong? I mean, I'll say I could be wrong. Maybe there's an afterlife. Maybe I, open my eyes after the last time I close them here, and whoa, there I am in this quantum field somewhere where whatever it is, there's Deepak, there's Deepak Chopra and Jesus, floating around in the quantum ether, something like that. Okay, then all right, I'll be pleasantly surprised. Hopefully I'll be pleasantly surprised and not in the bad place. Like, oh no.
Why is it getting so warm?
Yeah, that's right. Steve Martin had a funny riff about this back in in the 70s, his first album. In fact, Let's Get Small, it was called. Back in his day when he had the arrow through his head and all the stuff like that. He had a riff about, what if you died and woke up and found out that you were in heaven, and you're like, oh, all that stuff they told me in college, that was all bullshit. Oh no. Well, at least I didn't use the Lord's name in vain, did I? And they look it up, and he goes, oh my God, 9,687 times. He goes, oh no, Jesus Christ. Oh, anyway. Yeah.
Well, it's like Jordan Peterson, even, I think it was you or somebody that said that he was asked point blank, do you actually believe in the
I've asked him that, but lots of people have, and he has a hard time just giving a straight answer.
He's like, well, that'd take 40 minutes to explain. I'm like,
yeah.
No, it does. Just yes or no. Like, that's an easy, like, if you asked me that, I'd be like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's impossible.
Yeah.
Of course that didn't happen.
I was recently last summer at this conference in Italy, sponsored by Peter Thiel, who is himself a Catholic. And but super smart guy. And, almost everybody there was a theist of some kind. And they were mostly scientists and philosophers. And so it was all intellectual arguments. So I brought up Jordan with them. Like, the Jordan Peterson argument, it's mythically true. It represents things. And they were as frustrated as you and I are. Like, we want Jordan. Come on, man.
Yeah.
Own it. You're on our side now. Just own it.
Yeah.
And he's like, he won't, right? So they're as frustrated with him as we are, I guess, in that sense. So that kind of thing works. It depends on who you're talking to, I guess. And
Yeah.
then what was the other part? Well, on the other side, I guess the fine tuning argument. Some of those, kind of physics related ones, or the laws of nature sorts of things, or the first cause. Again, if you push back far enough, um, how do you explain where the particular configuration of the laws of nature came about, or the intricate designs of cellular machinery? This is Stephen Meyer's whole argument, that the machinery inside a cell is so unbelievably complicated. It's just hard to imagine how this could have come about gradually through a Darwinian process.
Yeah.
So of course I push him on this, like, well, then what do you think happened? I mean, do you think the deity kind of reached in to stir the particles up and like, okay, we're gonna now change RNA into DNA by doing a double helix, or spins it, or what is he really controlling the fall of every sparrow? Or
Right.
does nature mostly just do this, and God set up? This is how Myers explained it. That the deity front loaded, was the term he used, front loaded into the laws of nature, that there would then unfold in a way over long periods of time, complex systems. Like,
Yeah.
so in a way, it's, evolution is God's way of creating complex
Yeah.
systems, something like that,
Yeah.
with
God
occasion.
still did it no matter what. God still
Yeah.
did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But they still want to have at least some periodic interventions into the system, like to go from prokaryotic cells to eukaryotic cells that are more complex, or maybe the eye, or the origins of complex life, or the first organic molecules from inorganic molecules, or the first cells. And then they jump to the origins of consciousness, the origins of morality, good and evil, right and wrong. And then that's pretty much it. And again, we have some answers to those questions, but there's a lot we don't know
Yeah.
about, like, the origins of life. I just had Sarah Walker on my podcast. She's got a new book saying, forget everything you've read about the origins of life theory. It's purely science here.
Yeah.
None of that stuff is true. And the reason we don't have an explanation is because we don't have a good definition of life. So here's a completely different way of thinking about it. This assembly theory is her thing, that I don't pretend to understand. So I'm not going to try to even summarize it. But at least there's an acknowledgement by a scientist that's saying, okay, you know what, we've been working on this problem for 75 years and we still don't really understand it, so let's try something different. Okay, I like that, because at
Yeah.
least you're admitting ignorance on a problem. Now, of course, the Christian then just jumps in and goes, aha, the God of the gaps. Well, that's where the deity stepped in to do, stir the particles and make it happen. Yeah, but what are you going to do when Sarah or somebody eventually solves the problem? And then we don't need God in that gap anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. The God of the gaps. I remember being on the side of when the Big Bang was coming up a lot when I was a Christian. I was like,
Yes.
well, God, God slapped it all together. I mean, that's
Right.
it almost
Right.
just, it's just when you believe something, it gets into that confirmation bias. And I was in an echo chamber, and it's like anything in life. I have a particular car, and when I was looking for this car, it was like I never saw this car on the road before. And then now that I'm interested in this car
Yes,
and
you
I want to
notice
buy
it,
one, it's
right?
like everybody has that car. It's like I see it
Right.
everywhere. And
Right.
so I think it's similar to that within our beliefs, whatever
Yeah.
they are, even our political beliefs or just our ideas on anything. If you tend to lean a certain way, then you tend to believe and find things that seem to confirm what you already believe. And it just creates a monster.
Yes, indeed. Indeed it does. Yeah, the motivated reasoning, confirmation bias is very powerful. Everybody does it. You got to be really careful, particularly in things like that. Politics too. That anything our guy does is fine, but the other guy in the other party, he's no good.
Yeah.
So just do a Rawlsian test. the veil of ignorance. You don't know which party did that thing that you don't like or you do like. So party leader X did Y. Was that good or bad? If your answer is, well, it depends on which party was the doer, because if it's my party, then it's okay. If it's
Yeah.
the other party, it's not okay. Okay, then you're not a principled thinker, right?
Yeah. I
Your
saw a
guides are wrong.
YouTube video on that where this guy, some YouTube guy, was going around. I think it was at a Trump rally, and he was telling the Trump supporters what Trump did, but he said it was Biden.
Yes, right.
And it
Yeah.
was so funny because they were like, well, he should go to jail. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't Biden. It was Trump. Well, no one's perfect.
That's right.
I mean, I was just
Exactly.
like, it was like right in your front of your face. And it was just fascinating. It's like that one guy that goes around to abortion protests where it says,
yeah.
God is pro-life. And he's
Right.
like, goes up and says, what do you mean by pro-life? And he's like, I'm for life. Yeah. And he goes, what about God when he killed everybody except for Noah and his family? they just keep walking. They're like, I don't want to answer that. It just doesn't make sense. But and I was that person. That's what is so even baffling. I said this the other day on a video. No one's more surprised I'm an atheist than me. Like nobody, not even my family. I am the most surprised. I would have never, ever, ever in a million years. There are sermons out on YouTube of me preaching and saying stuff that it's like looking at another person.
Wow.
It's like I'm watching another person that just looks similar to me, but younger, and saying some of the most ridiculous things that I could ever imagine. And yet that was the stuff that I believed.
So besides Sapiens, what else did you read or hear, watch, or whatever that got you thinking?
Well, a lot of your debates. I saw a lot of your debates. I saw a lot of Christopher Hitchens, of course, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, all of them. Probably the other books that helped me was God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens and The God Delusion. Those two books really just made an impact on my mind. And if I'm honest, it was watching the debates that really did it for me, because it just made more sense. When I first started getting into the debates, I'll be honest, I was a little torn. I'm like, well, that sounds like God to me. Like, we can't explain that. And we do seem designed. I mean, that whole the watchmaker, you're walking through a field and you find a watch, this was created by somebody. And that's how I viewed it for the longest time. And I'll be honest, even though I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God at all. There's still sometimes I'll hear that and I'm like, yeah, I mean, what about that? There's still that piece of me that I look around at the beauty of everything, and it because I can't explain it, because I'm not a biologist, or I'm not a scientist. So I don't fully understand it. And so it just goes, that God of the gaps thing. So that's
a lot of people have difficulty just saying, I don't know, and just leave it hanging. Same thing with the conspiracy thing. Like, Jeffrey Epstein died, he killed himself or something. It's like, and then it's like, oh, maybe he was murdered. And I just remember for several weeks on Twitter, just like, let's just wait and see. I don't know anything. What do you know?
Yeah.
They've only told us a few things. Let's just wait and see. And people, they just feel they can't wait and see. He's like, we got to know.
Yeah. Well,
we don't know. We're going to speculate.
Yeah. I think it's something maybe you had said. It's like, when you don't know, then a conspiracy, you'll put something in there.
Right.
And it's that secret. It's like there's some kind of superior mindset, I feel like, that's involved in it, where I know secret things. I know what really happened.
Right.
And it just gets in. It's just a poison for the mind. I'm curious what you think about this. I know Christopher Hitchens wanted to eradicate religion altogether. I seem to lean a little bit more like what you said. I don't really have a problem with spirituality or even some religion, so to speak, as long as you don't tell me that I have to believe it or I'm going to hell. and you're not saying just ridiculous things that are 100% false, um, making claims and things that are just like, we know that's
Right.
not true. Like, we know that Adam and Eve were not the first two humans 6,000 years ago. We absolutely, with certainty, know that that's not true. You know,
Yeah.
so we're not going to be teaching that in school.
Same thing with the Mormon story about, how the Native Americans got here, or the Native American myths themselves, or the Papua New Guinean myths. They have their stories, but we know that they're not true. Literally, they can't be, because
Yeah.
here's the contrary evidence.
Well, that's
Mormons have.
near Missouri. I'm not too far from that, where Jesus is coming back for the Mormons.
You are? Oh, where are you?
I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, but
Okay.
literally just 30 minutes uh, east of here is the big Mormon temple where Jesus is going
Right.
to sit on or whatever.
Right. Oh no, the whole Mormon thing it's interesting because it's recent enough that you can track the actual detailed history.
Yeah, you
And
can prove that a false.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You go back 2,000 years or 4,000 years, things get a little fuzzier in the mist of history. So you can, people can get away more with the mythological stories as being literally true,
yeah,
because no one was around then. But, with the Mormons, it's like people were around and they wrote stories, and there's newspaper articles and,
yeah.
contrary evidence and so on. But
And that's part of the challenge. I mean, what would you say? Because people say this to me all the time. Well, how do you know that Jesus wasn't God? And I'm
well,
like, well,
you know,
I don't know, that, but it seems
but it's the
unlikely.
same way as, I guess, it's saying, can you prove a negative? How do you know there aren't aliens out there somewhere? Well, of course I don't know that. There might be.
Right.
But if you want to claim that there are, for sure that they've come here. All right, show me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is called the burden of proof argument. Who is the burden of proof on? And you can get into what Dan Dennett called burden tennis. The burden of proof is on you, whack. The burden of proof is on you, whack. Right? And it goes back and forth. My answer to that is the burden of proof is on the person making the claim, not the person challenging the claim.
Yeah.
So a more neutral example would be something like, I have a cure for COVID-19. You take this ivermectin, this will work. Well, does it work or not? Well, you're the one making the claim. Can you prove it doesn't work? You're the one making the claim it does. So show me your evidence.
Yeah.
And so it's that. So if somebody wants to say, I think Jesus is, the Son of God. Okay, show us what's your evidence.
Yeah.
And one counter, a new argument I've been trying recently that works pretty well, I think, is that if the arguments for the resurrection of Jesus are so good and the evidence is so clear, and there are these massive 800-page books written about this,
Yeah. The case for Christ.
the case for Christ, and all these theologians that do the debates. I've debated some of them, and here's my arguments, boom, here's my PowerPoint slides, boom, 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 and there's the conclusion. You should believe it. All right, if they're so good, why don't Jews believe it? I mean, you could say, well, Shermer, you're an atheist. Of course, you don't believe it because you're blinded to the evidence. What about Jews? I mean, they believe in the same God that you believe in, Yahweh. They believe in the same book, at least the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
And they even think there's going to be a Messiah. They believe in the Messiah concept. They just don't think it was the carpenter from Nazareth. That's all. So
Yeah.
if your arguments are so good, why can't you convince them? And
Yeah.
you can't say, oh, these rabbis, what do they know? They don't understand our arguments. Really? Come on. These are, great learned men that know all your arguments. They just don't believe it. I asked Ben Shapiro this when I was on his show, his Sunday special show. Why don't you accept Jesus as the Messiah? And that's exactly what he said. The Old Testament doesn't prophesize a person like Jesus. It prophesizes a great warrior,
Yeah.
and so on. And that was not Jesus, more like a Rambo Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that's, my mind is just so simple. And I think to myself, because I wouldn't say I'm a highly educated person. I mean, I read a lot and do a lot of studying now, and I went to Bible college. So I was, learning the Bible, which has been helpful in having a YouTube channel where I'm, talking about deconstruction and atheism and all of that, because I also have a great understanding of the Bible.
Yeah,
And
you
being
do.
an evangelical pastor. But so, I have a pretty simple mind. I wouldn't say I'm an intellectual at all, but I simply just think, well, if something is true, it's provable. Like, if it's true, it can be proved in some way. If not, then we're in the realm of faith. then it's like when Christians say, well, it takes more. Well, I don't want to be an atheist. It takes more faith to be an atheist. I'm like, that's absolutely completely wrong, because
Yes.
100% to believe in Jesus and God and all that, it requires faith, which is believing something without evidence. Science or atheism or whatever, a non-belief, requires no faith. That it's the 100%. What led me away from Christianity was evidence to the contrary, or the lack of evidence that it was true.
Yeah, that whole argument, it takes faith to be an atheist, is just nonsensical, because just define the word. It just, it's believing without evidence.
Right.
Well, we're not believing. So what are you talking about?
Right.
We would believe if there were evidence.
Well, it's like atheism or science is a religion. And I'm like,
Yeah, no.
I don't think
I
so. It
mean,
doesn't seem like one to me.
yeah, there's a lot of that. This is like a religion. That's like a religion. Yeah, there's a recent one on, wokeism is a religion, or anti-racism is a religion. Well, there's resemblances. There's
Sure.
original sin. I'm born racist. And then you have to be atoned for it by taking the DEI classes and all that stuff. There's similarities to it, but what do you mean by religion? Because for most religions, there's some supernatural component to it. There's a deity of some kind for most religions, not all, but I mean, people that study religions, historians of religion, psychologists of religion, they define it. You got to define, what are we talking about here,
Yeah.
right? So that, science is a religion. Okay, it's like saying the U.S. military is a religion. It's just like, it's just kind of turns the word into something meaningless that that doesn't have any usefulness for us. So, if you want to say, well, a cult, cults and religion, are they different? Yeah, okay, but we just have to define our terms,
Yeah.
right? So back in the day, when we in the 90s, when we started publishing Skeptic, we were covering the Jonestown and cults and Scientology and all that stuff, and I got some pushback from some academic sociologists who didn't like the use of the word cult. They said these are new religious movements, NRMs. Yeah, new religious movements, because cult is pejorative. It kind of, it conveys some kind of brainwashing or something. Whereas people that are religious are not like that. It's like, okay, you get caught up in the terms, but
Sure.
we just have to define them carefully so we know what we're talking about.
Well, you literally are reading my mind, Michael. My next question is, do you think Christianity is a cult?
Yeah. No, because again, what do we mean by that? The kind of the leader of the group, is not to be disputed or countered or proven wrong, or you can't leave the group, or there's undue influence, or especially there's financial or sexual abuse of the followers, that kind of thing. Most, okay, so I mean, there might be small examples of this. Catholic priests molesting children. Okay, that would be an example. But is that a cult? When we think of a cult, we think of something like a Jonestown or a Heaven's Gate or whatever, where the people are isolated, they're cut off from their families. This doesn't
High
happen for
control.
most. Yeah, this doesn't happen for most religions. I mean, these big, even the big charismatic churches we've been talking about. These are not cults. People, they come and go, they can leave. There's no pressure. They don't force them to stay awake for 3 straight days while they listen to the minister's sermons, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's, the financial aspects are more transparent and voluntary. There's less pressure. If you go to Rick Warren's Saddleback Church, they're not going to try to talk you into taking a second mortgage on your home to give it to Rick so he can buy a private jet,
Right.
something like that. And if he did, then that leads to your Tammy Faye Baker and
Yeah.
Jim Baker and all that. Look what happens. That was more cultish, I would say,
Sure.
because of the abuse, as opposed to
Very culty for sure. Yeah.
yeah, something
And
like
the
that.
hypocrisy in the church seems to be, I mean, I've been around long enough to have seen so many famous preachers
Mhm.
get caught in scandals. I was personal friends with, not close friends with, but I mean, I had his cell number and we would chat and go to lunch a couple times. But the guy out in Colorado Springs,
Oh,
yeah, the one that was preaching that homosexuality is in a
yes,
Haggart.
Yeah, that's right, Jim Hager. Yeah, it turns out he was,
Yeah,
he was
preaching
gay
against
or something.
homosexuality, yet getting
Yeah,
massages from a gay
yeah,
masseuse, and
yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing didn't help the Christian message. Now, clearly, that does not prove there is no God, but it definitely says something.
Yeah, yeah. What does it say? Well, it says that religious people have the same temptations as everybody else. They have a human nature, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Joseph Smith's, desire for multiple women that led him to the revelation from God of polygamy, right?
God
So,
told me.
honey, I like to reconstruct. So, honey, I've been talking to God, and you're not going to believe what he said. But that woman down the street that I'm already sleeping with, he says I have to have sex with her and make her one of my wives. And then
Clean.
Brigham Young apparently was appalled by this initially, and then he tried it out and said, "Hey, this is kind of fun."
I
All right.
think God is into this.
Yeah. Well, this is just male psychology, right? I mean, this is, men would like to have more sexual partners than women. We know this from surveys. There's tons of
Sure.
data on this. David Buss has written a bunch of books on this. Men like more variety. They're less discriminating. They're less risk averse than women, and so on. There's good evolutionary reasons for this, but in general, when men are acting like that, these preachers, they're just doing what men do. The hypocrisy is claiming, well, this is what God wants me to do, or I'm a sinner, but now I can be forgiven by confessing my sins to Jesus, so everything's okay. Nothing to see here, folks.
Sure.
I've been forgiven. Let's just move on. Okay.
Oh, that's part of
Anyway,
the immorality of it. What Christopher Hitchens talks about, vicarious forgiveness or redemption, or I forget how he worded it, but you know, because I remember this. I was hypocritical in many ways, right? I would tell the congregation that it's wrong to drink, yet when I'd go on vacation, I'd drink. And that wasn't just me. I mean, this was,
why is that? I mean, why the no drinking? Because that is that biblical?
it's there was biblical, avoid the very appearance of evil. And alcohol is evil. It makes you do evil things, and so you're
Well,
not
in
supposed to partake.
excess, but
Right.
come on.
I know. I agree. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I've eventually shifted on that, and even started a thing called Beer in the Bible. I was still a pastor at the time,
Beer
and
in
I
the
would go to
Bible. I like
go
that.
to bars. Yeah. I'd
I'll have
rent,
a Guinness,
I
please,
know.
along with my Genesis.
Yeah, I'd go to a bar and rent out a room, and we got so popular in here where I'm at in Kansas City that I had bars calling me, a pastor at the time,
Bring your group.
saying, "Hey, would you bring your group?" Because I'd bring like 50 guys. We'd drink
Wow.
beer. I'd teach the
Right.
Bible and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, we were definitely pretty progressive at that time, and I was getting more and more progressive until finally I was like, "All this is BS. I don't believe any of it." But yeah, the hypocrisy was rampant. I mean, I know preachers that, charismatic. I know TV preachers. I know these guys personally, and I know some of them that preach against gambling and all that stuff, and they go to Las Vegas and
Yeah.
and they drink and they do other things. I know this. Like, I know
Yeah.
these guys,
Yeah.
and it's just
How do they justify it in their minds, do you think, since you know
well,
them?
they say I'm human, and the devil just
Oh, the
led me
devil made me.
astray. Yeah, and then they ask God to forgive them, and God throws their sins as far as the east is from the west, and not to be remembered against them anymore. It's like, that's what's so immoral. I did a video about this. Evangelical Christianity is immoral when it comes to, if I do something and I go to God and I repent and ask God to forgive me, I'm forgiven and it's washed away. That's
Mm.
it. If someone then asks me about it, it's gone. I don't, you know what I mean? And that's just immoral, because you can do things, just ask God to forgive you, and you're good. And
Yeah.
you're good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's not constructive for social cohesion, because shouldn't you be apologizing and asking for forgiveness from the person you hurt,
absolutely.
not God? I mean, if
Absolutely.
you hurt nobody, then who cares?
Right.
What's the problem?
Right. Yeah. It's just I look back on it now and I just shake my head. I just can't believe that I lived that. I say this often, and Christians just have a heyday with this. I'm a better person today as an atheist. I'm more moral.
Hmm.
I'm I'm more honest. Um, I'm just a better human
Interesting.
now, and
Wow.
I
Wow.
can't hardly explain that. That,
Wow.
part of it might have been what I went through back in 2019, after getting divorced and walking away from faith. I went, I was deep, I was going to therapy and just really working on myself and kind of going through a
Mm.
midlife crisis. And I came through all of that. And then I, became agnostic, and now atheist. And maybe it was all that work that also led me to being a better person, not to say that there aren't great Christians. I have a lot of my friends are still Christian. We just don't talk about religion. They know what I think, and they know my perspective. But
Yeah.
we just play tennis together.
Right.
That's what we do. We play tennis and drink a whiskey sour or whatever. We don't talk about religion or
Right.
politics either.
Yeah, you have to be
We
careful of
yeah,
that
you have to
these
be
days.
careful with all
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
I should
see,
point out, by the way, that a lot of these guys you mentioned, Hitch and Dennett, Dawkins, Sam Harris, on stage, which is where most people see them, they're a little more pugilistic because that's the nature of the presentation. If it's a debate, it's set up to, well, I'm here to try to win.
yeah,
I'm gonna make the best arguments I can. Personally, they're not nearly that pugnacious. They're pretty nice about it, and whatever somebody believes, I don't care.
even
So
Christopher Hitchens.
yeah, even Hitch, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, after one of our debates we did together, we walked off. He said, "I think we put on a pretty good show tonight, Michael." It was kind of a performance, right?
yeah,
And that's what it is. So, not that he didn't believe what he said. It's just that, it's just, when you're on stage, you're going to I'm going to go for it here. I'm going to try to make the best arguments I can. I'm going to try to beat this guy. I just did a debate in Austin 2 weeks ago with Ian Hersey and Russ Douthit from the New York Times on one side, arguing the case that the West needs a religious revival. And then Adam Carolla and I were on the other side that we don't.
oh,
And yeah, you can watch this online. It's really quite. We won. We won the debate. They did a Oxford style
Oxford style.
vote before and after, and whoever moves the most people over to their side. So this is a kind of funny thing how that happens is that I'm rooting at the start for almost everybody to be on their side, so I have more people to move over.
Yeah,
Makes it easier. I don't want if everybody's on my side, I'm going to lose.
yeah.
Because they don't have to do much to get a few people to flip their vote. So anyway, yeah, we won on that one. But in the green room and afterwards, we were all just partying and having fun together. And I'm friends with Ian Hersey. I didn't get to see much of her because she has bodyguards with her because she has to be careful,
Yeah.
especially after what happened to Salman Rushdie at the Chautauqua thing in Upper New York City, Upper State New York 2 summers ago, where he got stabbed and lost his eye, almost died.
Oh, wow.
Ian's worried about that because that could happen. One of these lunatic Islamists goes after her because she still has the fatwa against her, much
Wow.
like Salman Rushdie did, at least in the minds of some people. So yeah, but and Russ Douthit is like, yeah, I'll come on your podcast, and yeah, here's my book, and big friends, super friendly, but on stage, we're just boom, boom, boom.
Sure.
Yeah. So there's that. And then the other point I was going to make, again, there's people like Martin Gardner, who was one of the founders of the modern skeptical movement. He had the Scientific American column before I did. But one of the great debunkers of, psychics and astrology and spoon bending, Uri Geller, the spoon bender, and UFOs and Scientology and cults. I mean, before me, he was doing all that.
Yeah.
And but he was a theist. He was
Oh,
a fideist, Fideist, which is a pragmatism, a William James, Miguel Unamuno philosophy of pragmatism. That if it's a big important question that science does not really have an answer to, and it makes a difference in your life, then just go ahead and believe whatever works for you, pragmatically speaking. So more neutrally than God is free will and determinism. You can read all the books. The determinists have great arguments, and then the compatibilists like Dan Dennett, they have great arguments, and so it goes back and forth. And I've had all these guys on the podcast. I've read all their
yeah.
books. I'm a compatibilist, but the determinists, yeah, they have good arguments, but in the end, uh, in my opinion, none of the determinists actually believe any of the stuff they're saying, because they
Right.
walk around assuming they're making choices,
Right.
and that they have some kind of volition. And I think most people do that. And I can't prove that we have volition, as well as maybe the determinists can argue that we don't. But for the most part, everybody just pragmatically acts as if free will is true.
Right.
So Martin's argument was that we can do the same thing with God's existence and the afterlife and so on. He says, I admit, I agree, the atheists have better arguments than the theists do. They do. But, they're not knocked down for sure. There's no God. So whatever, I believe.
Yeah.
And that used to drive people like Randy crazy. Like, but Martin, you admit that Uri Geller cannot bend spoons, right? Yeah, of course. That's all bullshit. Yeah. Okay. Well, how about the rest? Like religion. Well, anyway, something like that. If somebody makes that kind of argument, it's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the story I also tell about Ken Miller, who was one of the great debunkers of intelligent design creationism. He's a microbiologist at Brown University. And, he wrote that book. Finding Darwin's God, I think it was. Anyway, most of the book is about science and religion, and why religion doesn't have anything to do with science, and why the creationists are wrong, and so on. At the end, the last chapter is on. And by the way, I'm a Catholic, and I accept Jesus as my savior, and that's I accept the whole thing. It's like,
Wow.
what? And so I tell this story multiple times. I was at a conference with Richard Dawkins and Ken Miller. We're all on stage together. And, and his book had just been published. So Richard's like, Ken, okay, you can't possibly believe this literally is true, do you? I mean, what if we found a piece of the true cross, and
Right.
on the piece of the true cross was a little bit of flesh, and we could extract the DNA from Jesus, and since he was born of a virgin and the whole thing, right? Yeah, and so he's not going to have the normal DNA like a human, right? And Ken could see where he's going with this, and he's like, Richard, I'm not claiming any of this is literally true. I'm just saying I'm a Catholic. This is what I believe.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, well, then what else is there to say? It's like nothing.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a lot of people are like that. They're like, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just what I believe. Okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of when I was a pastor, you just assume everybody believes it literally like you do.
Right.
And, and I
Right.
had a big enough church that I had conversations with people, and I was always shocked. And frankly, I always felt like they weren't really a Christian. Honestly, they weren't really
Mm,
saved, if I'm honest, back then.
mm.
And I know when they would say, well, yeah, I don't actually believe that, and I was like, what? Like, how do you not believe that? It's absolutely true. And it's required for salvation. Like, it's like, what is it? C.S. Lewis said he was either a liar or a lunatic, or he was
Lord,
Lord.
Lord, liar, lunatic. Yeah, I get that periodic. How about just honestly delusional, or
Yeah.
just honestly mistaken? Like
Yeah.
I thought he was this, and well, he wasn't.
Because don't most people, I mean, you're not a mythicist, are you? I mean, you believe that Jesus
No, I
felt
think Jesus probably
history.
really
Yeah,
existed.
me
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
He was
yeah,
apocalyptic teacher. I believe that he was Jewish. He was
yeah.
a
The
rabbi.
Bart Ehrman has a whole book about this stuff. Yeah, I think it's pretty solid on that part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that last move, like and from the apocalyptic preacher to son of God was risen, from the dead.
And he's
That's
coming
added
back.
on later, right? That could
Right.
easily be explained by, well, this is what happens when the stories grow and you exaggerate the account to make it inexplicable except by miracle. And
Yeah.
we
I
know
saw
the
your
research.
interview
Yeah. Oh, you saw
with
that. Yeah.
Lance. Yeah. Well, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I
Oh,
want to
with
hear.
Lance,
Yeah.
with Lance,
How
I
things
saw.
were added on and made more.
Yes. Yes. Well, we know how this happens is that from studies with sort of the psychology of magic. So if you show people, Penn and Teller doing some trick or whatever, now tell me what you saw. They will repeat what they think they saw in a way that it didn't happen that way. Often it's what the magician tells them is going to happen that they think is what they saw. Okay, I'm now going to do the following. And then here I am, I'm doing it. But they're not actually doing that. They're doing something else. You don't know what they're doing because it's a trick, right?
Yeah.
And so then they'll repeat what they think they saw in a way that it could not have been done with a magic trick. Like, like Randy used to tell this story of doing some bending a key of Barbara Walters on Barbara Walters ABC. It was one of her morning shows she was on, and she had Uri Geller on, and Uri Geller bent her key, and they actually recorded it. So Randy had seen it, and he saw exactly what happened. So and the way it worked was he like, okay, take your key out, Barbara. So she takes her house key out, hold it up. Okay, it's very straight. Okay, now put it in your hand here. Now close your hand. Don't let me touch it now. And he's like, bend, 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 bend. Okay, now let's see how I'm doing. So she opens it up. He takes the key, and then he like scoots his chair, and then he puts the key back in her hand. And so, okay, now don't let me touch it. Now I'm not going to touch it. Bend, bend, bend. Now open your hand, holds it up, and the key is bent. Well, Randy showed that the little move he makes, well, let's check here. And he adjusts his chair. That's the move. He just bent the key.
Oh,
And she later then says, Uri never touched my key. And Randy's go, yes, he actually did. No, he didn't. Look at the tape. And he's like, oh,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. And so, but the magician says, I'm not going to do this, or I am going to do this, and that's what people remember, not what actually happened.
Is this
Because
when is that example that I've heard about where you tell a person, hey, you were lost? Do you remember when you were lost in the mall?
yes, that was the Elizabeth Loftus lost in a mall experiment. Yeah, yeah. Just asking the question plants the idea that they were once lost in a mall as a child. These are
Yeah,
adult subjects. Yeah, and then they would elaborate on, oh yeah, this is what I was feeling. This is what I saw. None of this happened. They're just making stuff up.
interesting.
And in a way, we all do this. I mean, this is not like there's some mental illness with these people. This is Elizabeth's point: is that memory is not like a video recording, and you play it back on the theater of your mind, and you watch the little homunculus is watching the screen. Go, oh look, there's me and my 5th birthday. Or whatever. It's not like that. There's nothing
Yeah,
like that. You're just making stuff up based on fragments that are presumably there from reality, but you fill in a lot of the gaps with your imagination, and everybody does this.
yeah. So, to be mindful of your time, a few questions for you personally. What
Oh yeah.
are a few of your greatest achievements, the things you're most proud of? Just at least three.
Well, outside of career, of course, my family, yeah,
Yeah,
and I have a daughter, I have a son, and happily married, and my bike career was great. And just my friends. Those are all really the most important things. Career wise, I guess, my books, the magazine Skeptic, publishing Skeptic, here's our latest issue on crime and punishment. There it is.
I love it.
That we're still in print. I mean, there's not many magazines that survive the internet
Yeah,
that killed off most magazines. And so just that in my books, I really like writing books. I do it. I don't need the money. It's there's not much money to be made in writing books anyway, but that I enjoy the process. It's like a product I'm producing, and I'm trying to, with each book, answer some particular question, and I get
yeah.
great fulfillment out of thinking about it and researching and writing. It takes about 3 years for the whole process for each book. So
Which is
that
the most
that
successful
would be
book?
it. Was that?
What's the most successful book you've written? Like the one that
Oh
sold?
well, but best selling, the probably my first one, "Why People Believe Weird Things," is still, I think that's probably still the bestseller. A few
Okay.
others, "The Believing Brain" did really well. "The Moral Arc's" done okay.
How's
My latest
conspiracy doing? Because I'm
Conspiracy was not a great, huge bestseller. It's an interesting thing. I've had an agent for a long time, the Brockmans, and same publisher for most of my books, Macmillan, Henry Holt, Times Books. And when I took the conspiracy idea, this was right when Trump had gotten elected, maybe 2 years into it, and he was still going on about the conspiracy to do this
election
and
was
that.
stolen and
Well, he thought the 2016 election was rigged, and he won. That was really weird. It's like, dude, you won. Why are you saying it was rigged? you know, I mean, they have a saying that conspiracy theories are for losers. That is, the losing party thinks the other side cheated. The
right,
winning party never says that it was
right.
rigged. It's really crazy. Anyway, but conspiracies were, just huge. They were everywhere. And so I put together a proposal. My agent's like, nah, we don't think this will sell to a publisher. And I'm like, well, let's shop it around. They go, nah, we don't. we don't think it has much hope. So I got a new agent because I really wanted to do this, and he shopped it around. Sure enough, nobody wanted it, except I finally found a publisher, Johns Hopkins University Press, that saw, what, this is important because this is what everybody talks about.
Yeah.
It's true. And so that book is still, it just came out in paperback last year, so it's doing pretty well in paperback. But I mean, the book sales, what do they really mean? It's to me, it's the quality of not just the writing, but what are you trying to say? Do you have something interesting to say?
Yeah.
And I read a lot of books. I do 2 books a week on my podcast, so and I read most of them, and so I love the process of reading books, writing books, publishing books, and talking to authors about books, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that and I'd say that's probably it.
Yeah. Well, I really love your stuff. I mean, like I said, you've been very helpful in my journey. I came across you, I think on YouTube, is how I came across, and actually it might've been Joe Rogan. I might've seen some of your stuff with Joe Rogan and then, Graham Hancock. I think there was one where it was you, Graham Hancock, and somebody else.
Randall Carlson.
Yes.
Yeah, his
Yeah.
sidekick there. Yeah, that was an intense, almost 4 hours. Oh boy.
Yes.
Because Joe, he really loves all those alternative archaeology stuff, and so it was really 3 on 1.
Yeah.
But I'm used
Yeah.
to that, so I don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't listen to that podcast as much as I used to anymore. I mean, I love Joe Rogan. I think he's a great dude. And I'm sure personally, like, he seems like a good dude. Like,
He
in
is a good
person.
dude.
Yeah. He
He
seems
is.
like a really
Yeah.
good dude.
Yeah.
Just a little bit for me, just personally, a little bit too conspiratorial,
Yeah. Yeah.
for my tastes,
Yeah.
at least lately. And it was like every episode, when I stopped listening to him, it was because every episode was aliens and UFOs.
Yeah.
And I was
He
like,
likes all that.
oh, come on, please. Can you talk about something other than UFOs?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's kind of boring to have someone like me on that says, well, you know what? It's just not true.
Yeah.
Well, that's not interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you know what? It's something I used to, back in my preacher days, we called that if you were led astray from the Bible, it was because you had itching ears. And that's what I feel like conspiracy theories are.
Itching ears. I
They
haven't
itch
heard
your
that. That's a
ears.
good
Yeah.
one.
It's something that it is compelling, it's interesting. Atlantis. You mean there's an ancient civilization that,
Right.
like that is
Oh, it's a romantic
scalable.
story. It's totally, yeah. And that's an ancient mythology, right? There was a great people before us,
Yeah.
and we got to get back to those days.
Yeah.
Something like that. The kind of the myth of the golden age. Before civilization, there was the Atlanteans.
Yeah.
At least to Graham's credit, he did, kind of distances himself from the ancient alien people.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Like Gaia or whatever that is.
Everybody has a line of demarcation where they think going beyond the line is just lunatic. Like there are, the 9/11 truthers, there's people even crazier than them. The people that think there were no airplanes at all. Those were all CGI fake videos, and the regular 9/11 truthers are go, okay, those guys are crazy.
I watched some video the other day. There was a guy was interviewing all these conspiracy flat earthers, I think, or no, conspiracy theory guys. All of them were believing in QAnon and all that. And one of the guys was like, also, the earth is flat. And the other people that believed in QAnon were like, dude, you're crazy.
That's right.
And I was thinking, oh my goodness,
you've gone too far now.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, JFK, I mean, surely the CIA was involved in that. And I don't know about the moon landing, but what are you talking about? The earth ain't flat.
That's really funny. There was a book back in the 70s, I think, that was called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti, Michigan. In Ypsilanti, Michigan, is a mental health, like a psychiatric ward, and the guy who wrote it, Keish, I think was his name, McKeish, something like that. He's the head psychiatrist there, and there were all the schizophrenics and the psychotics. I mean, this is one of these extreme places, like One Flew Out of the Cuckoo's Nest, kind of crazy. And so he wrote a book called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti. That is to say, he had 3 patients, each of who thought he was Jesus. So he thought, I'll get them all in the room together and see what they say.
Yeah.
And each of them said the other two are, they're delusional. They're completely crazy. I'm the one.
And that's the way it is. That's the way it is. When I was a Christian, I mean, people would say, I'm Mormon. I'm like, oh.
Oh,
Whoa, you
you are
guys believe
delusional.
some really crazy stuff.
That's so funny.
By the way, the rapture's real.
Right.
He's definitely coming back. Well, Michael, I can't even tell you how much I appreciate you. One last question that's going to seem like out of left field. What is something that you did as a child that you love doing that you no longer do?
Oh, well, I guess playing baseball. Well, I'm a lifelong cyclist, but I also took up tennis again. But
Yeah,
yeah, I kind of miss baseball. I really love playing baseball.
yeah.
And
That's
also maybe how about the innocence of childhood? What is it? I wish I didn't know now what I did. No, I wish I knew now what I didn't know. No, how does it go? I
yeah,
forget. Anyway, I wish I was as ignorant as I was when I was a child. Something like that.
yeah. Well, that's yeah. I play tennis as well. I think maybe I emailed that to you. So I played in high school, on the team and all that, and then of course I went to Bible college, so I played just intramural
Oh
tennis. But
yeah.
I play competitive now.
It's
So
a beautiful sport. What are you ranked? Are you a 3.5,
4,
4.0? 4.0
yeah,
is good. Yeah,
4-0.
I'm trying to get to 4.0. I'm getting close. The guys that are actually officially 4.0, they usually beat me, but I can see the pathway. I can get there. To
Yeah,
get to like 5.0, I don't think that's going to happen at my age. It's a hard sport. I mean, it's just I take lessons from the pro at the club, and he works with me on some particular thing, and I get good at it. But I could see it's going to take like 10,000 shots to get
yeah,
that down where I don't even think about it. I just do it.
yeah.
And there's
Yeah,
like a dozen or 2 dozen different things, the backhand, the forehand, the volley, the overhead, the swing and volley, the serve on each side. It starts adding up, and he gives me like 6 things to think about. And then all of a sudden the ball just comes boom right at me. It's like, I don't have time to think about even one thing.
yeah. Yeah, I was about a 3.5, and probably got up to almost a 4.5, but to maintain that, just like what you said, I was taking lessons and was probably playing 4, 5 times a week, and I was doing drills, and I would hit 10,000, not literally 10,000 balls, but I would go
Yeah.
through the ball thing and have someone there to throw me the ball, and you'd hit that forehand just 500 times, and then backhand 500 times, and serve 500 times, and I was doing that multiple times a week.
Yeah.
Well, man, I got really good to where I was doing it.
Yeah.
And then I hurt my shoulder
Oh yeah.
and couldn't play. And it was also winter. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, I'm just going to take off. And then when I came back, I think I'd got up to a solid 4, maybe even higher. But after I hurt my shoulder and didn't play for almost a year, I came back and I'm like, how do you play this game again?
Yeah.
Maybe I should pick up pickleball. Even I make fun of
Pickleball.
people that play pickleball, but
Yeah, it's so popular at our club. Did you have rotator cuff issues?
I never you're gonna go, Timmy, you are conspiratorial. So my shoulder was hurting for about 6 months, and I just didn't want to go to the doctor and get surgery on it. And I was just, because you just kept thinking it'll get better. It'll get
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
And I know I can't believe I'm telling you this. I went to a acupuncture.
Oh, that's not good. No, that may not be. There may be something to that for
Oh,
some other
well,
reason.
because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
got better. I was
Yeah.
hurting
Yeah.
for about 6, 7 months. 3
Right.
treatments of that. I was pain free, back to serving.
Oh
All of a
yeah. No,
sudden,
it
I'm
can work. Yeah. No, it
okay,
definitely can
okay,
work.
okay.
And
I was like,
chiropractic
maybe
too.
I shouldn't have said this.
Massage therapy, chiropractic, acupuncture. Some of that works for probably not for any of the woo woo reasons,
Sure.
but just for some other reasons. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't believe it was mystical. I just believed, I mean, there was something, because he did the electric stimulation
Oh
through it
yes.
too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so it was doing something, and massage, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I was doing all the exercises, and yeah, it got better and back to normal. So
Yeah, I lost a year when I tore my Achilles playing tennis. and that was terrible. I had to have the surgery and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a hard sport physically on your body, and pretty much
Yes.
every guy at the club I play with, they're all in their 50s and 60s, 70s. They've all got stories about injuries and surgeries, and
Yeah. Yeah. I play
yeah.
with a guy who's 87.
Oh wow,
And if
wow,
it's anywhere near him, he's hitting it back and
yeah,
it's over the net. He does not ever err, but
yes.
he is 87. So just don't hit it to him.
Just don't hit it to him, exactly.
Just don't hit it to him.
Yes, I know. I'm because I'm still a cyclist. I'm fitter than most of the guys I play with, but most of them have been playing for decades, and they beat me because, yeah, they just know how to place it. They get it back, and eventually I make a mistake, or they do the little drop shots, and I can't get there, or
Yep.
the lobs. I cannot lob very well, but they lob me. I come up to the net like I'm supposed to. I'm ready. I'm holding for my volley, and they whoop, bye bye.
Yeah. Yeah. Often I can beat guys that are actually better than me. And I'll even tell them after I beat them, I'm like, listen, I know you're better than me. I'm not thinking I'm better than you. I just underplayed you and did the
Right.
drop shots and, you know,
Yeah.
would serve like barely over the net. And just, they're not used to that. They're used to guys that are just pounding it all the time.
Yeah.
And so I can just run them around. Clearly not better. They're way better than I am. I just kind of outsmarted them, I guess. I don't know.
Then you get up in the level of like 6'0", 6'5", and there's like 1,000 guys that are like in the top 1% of all of tennis in the entire world,
Yeah.
and they're nowhere near like a Djokovic or they're not going to make they
No.
couldn't even make the cut to make any of the Grand Slams.
Yeah.
And it's just there's just so many good players. It just
Have you ever
lost.
seen them play like live?
Oh yeah, we went.
It's unbelievable.
We went out to Indian Wells and watched Djokovic and Sinner
It's
and
unbelievable.
Alcaraz, and we just were like 10 feet from them on the practice courts. That's free. You could just sit there and watch them practice like 2 hours before their match. They're out there whacking away with their coach or whatever. It's astonishing how hard they hit. And you can see why
Every shot.
the balls go flat after a while because they hit them so hard.
Yeah. And that's what's so interesting about they hit it so hard every time, no matter what. It's
Right.
how
Right.
can you hit it like that every time? I have to have it put to me just perfectly to get a really good shot.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where you put it. They're going to slam it back over.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been thinking about switching to a two-handed backhand because I never learned that. Because the guys that have a two-handed backhand, they hit it a lot harder than I do.
I do. I have a two-handed backhand. It's
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. How long would it take me to learn that?
You know,
Like 6
honestly, you could learn that in a summer.
yeah, couple
Yeah,
months.
yeah, you
Yeah,
could pick it up in a couple months. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I did a single hand backhand. This was young when I was younger,
yeah.
and early on I took some lessons, and they said you should switch to a two-handed
I
backhand.
know,
Good.
everybody's doing it now, yep.
Yeah.
I guess Federer is probably the last of the greats that did, one-handed backhand, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, oh well.
Well,
Alright.
in
Speaking
closing,
of which, I have a tennis clinic tonight actually
hey,
with
well, cool. How can people follow you, get a hold of you, watch you?
skeptic.com and michaelshermer.com is just the easiest place to find us.
Awesome,
Yeah.
Michael. I can't even tell you.
All
I
right.
appreciate your work, and
That's
thanks for
great.
coming on the show. I'll talk to
Okay.
you soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you.